6, 5, 4.
Suddenly, a sharp turn toward the Pentagon.
Any hunch why he didn't keep going?
I have a hunch.
Details from the tower never heard before. And caught on surveillance video, the fuzzy faces of criminals in action and evidence too dark to see. Now, watch as smart new technology clears up the picture and nails down the suspects. Could this high-tech vision unmask the anthrax attacker?
I can guarantee you that the people who bought those stamps were caught on video.
Anthrax. Scare after scare, in building after building. But even after the cleanup, is it safe to go back inside?
Do you think we are going to have to demolish some of the buildings that have been affected with anthrax?
The enemy at work. Also, they call themselves the first victims of terrorism, the U.S. hostages in Iran, paraded before the world to humiliate America, terrorized for 444 days.
I woke up to this blood-curdling scream. They were torturing men, women, and children.
Now they feel double-crossed, betrayed, as the White House seems to side with their captors.
I was dumbfounded and astounded and ashamed of our government that it could turn its back on us at this time.
They made a deal. Isn't a deal a deal?
Plus, the government wants to take over airport security.
I would feel safer, yes, I would. Government workers are more professional than private workers.
100 United States senators can't be wrong. I'm John Stossel, and I say, give me a break.
2020 begins in 60 seconds. And now, from Times Square in New York, Barbara Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to 2020. Tonight, the tragedy of September 11th, told as you have never heard it before. For the first time, overcoming their emotional trauma, two of the air traffic controllers on duty that day are able to talk about the tension in the tower and their desperation as they watched the disaster unfold, helpless to stop it. What actually happened? Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross with the final terrible minutes of American Flight 77.
It's a very normal day. I seem to recall it was a beautiful day in this Washington, D.C. area. Crystal clear, very nice temperature.
It has taken 6 weeks, but air traffic controller Danielle O'Brien is now ready to talk about her September 11th.
And that particular day, I was assigned to the radar room.
Nation's 2-0.
A day when her cool, calm demeanor, handling Dallas Airport outside Washington, would be put fully to the test.
These went from planes to people. They were blips, and now they were human lives.
At 8:25 a.m., she handled the routine on-time departure of American Flight 77 with 64 people on board, a Boeing 757 like this one. 1 hour and 12 minutes later, the plane would crash into the Pentagon.
It was just a normal flight that came through the airspace.
With what she recalls as a normal radio transmission.
American 77 Dulles approach, climb and maintain 17,000. And then I asked American 77 to contact the next controller. American 77, contact Washington Center, 120.65. Good luck.
Good luck. Do you have any idea now why you might have said good luck?
I have no idea whatsoever. It's chilling. It's chilling. I usually say good day as I ask an aircraft to switch to another frequency or have a nice flight, but never good luck.
20 minutes later, the hijacked airplanes began their deadly coordinated missions, and air traffic controllers from Boston to New York to Washington were the first to realize what was going on.
My cell phone went off, and it was an associate of mine from Boston who asked, hey, John, are you watching this on TV? And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, that's American 11.
John Carr is the president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association.
I almost dropped my coffee. I said, oh my God, what are you talking about? And he said, that's American 11 that made that hole in the World Trade Center. And I said, you're kidding me. And he said, no, and there's another one that just turned south towards New York. We lost him too. And so basically I was watching in horror, expecting to see what we all eventually saw.
At the Dulles Tower, Danielle O'Brien also saw the TV pictures from New York and headed back to her post.
Traffic 12 o'clock.
Now to help other planes quickly land.
Speedbird 117,
We started moving the planes in as quickly as we could. Then I noticed the aircraft. It was an unidentified plane to the southwest of Dulles, moving at a very high rate of speed. I had literally a blip and nothing more. I slid over to the controller on my left, Tom Howell, and I asked him, do you see an unidentified plane there southwest of Dulles? And his response was, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Look how fast he is.
And then I said, oh my God, it looks like he's headed to the White House. I started yelling, John, we got a target headed right for the White House.
A representation of the FAA radar scope based on information obtained by 2020 shows the plane headed straight for what is known as P-56, Prohibited Airspace 56, which covers the White House and the Capitol, at a speed of about 500 miles an hour, with no radio contact whatsoever.
Was he on a normal flight approach of any kind?
Not at all.
Full throttle?
Full out.
How far out was that plane?
Between 12 and 14 miles. John, our supervisor, relayed verbatim. Okay, he's 12 miles west. He's moving very fast, eastbound. Okay, guys, where is he now? 11 miles west. And it was just a countdown. 10 miles west. 9 miles west. Somewhere right in this vicinity, in this time frame, our supervisor picked up our line to the White House and started relaying to them the information. We have an unidentified, very fast-moving aircraft inbound toward your vicinity, 8 miles west.
Vice President Cheney was rushed to a special basement bunker.
7 miles west.
White House staff members were told to run away from the building.
You guys, please, all the way to 8th Street, please.
And it went 6, 5, 4. And I had it in my mouth to say 3. And all of a sudden, the plane turned away. In the room, it was almost a sense of relief. This must be a fighter. This must be one of our guys, sent in, scrambled to patrol our capital and to protect our president. And we sat back in our chairs and breathed for just a second. In the meantime, all the rest of the planes are still flying and we're taking care of everything else. And the plane turned back. It continued the right-hand turn, made a 360-degree maneuver.
A big loop?
Correct. And we're telling the supervisor he's turning back in. He's turning back eastbound.
Then the turn kept going. And that's when I think I yelled to John. I said, oh my God, John, he's coming back.
We lost radar contact with that aircraft. And we waited, and we waited, and your heart's just beating out of your chest. And then the Washington National controllers came over our speakers in our room and said, Dulles, hold all of our inbound traffic. The Pentagon's been hit. I remember some folks gasping. I think I remember a couple expletives.
Tears?
No, no tears. Not a single tear among us. No one broke down. No one strayed from their duties.
But with the sky still full of planes, no one knew and no one knows to this day if more planes were about to be hijacked.
The order came, get every plane in the sky in the United States. We don't care where he was going. Get them on the ground. An operations manager came to each one of us. Are you okay? Do you want to be relieved? And I said, no, let me stay. Let me get this cleaned up. We need to get these guys on the ground.
You weren't too rattled?
Not at that moment. It was a sense of urgency. It was a sense of protectiveness. It's the same protectiveness we work these planes with every day of the year. But daggone it, nobody was going to take any more. Not if we could help it.
According to FAA radar records, almost 5,000 aircraft, the green dots, were safely guided to the ground in under 2 hours, leaving behind a nationwide coverage of blue dots. Those are military jet fighters.
The air traffic controllers achieved the impossible, and it was something that had never been contemplated, something that had never been practiced, and yet they did it with professionalism and skill. I'm very proud of them.
Since then, Danielle O'Brien has gone to the actual scene to see for herself what happened.
I've been down to the Pentagon and stood on the hillside and imagined where, according to what I saw on the radar, that flight would have come. And I think that they came eastbound, and because the sun was in their eyes that morning, and because the White House was beyond a grove of trees, I think they couldn't see it. I think they couldn't see it. It was too fast. They came over that Pentagon or saw it just in front of them. You can't miss the Pentagon. It's so telltale by its shape and its size. And they said, look, there it is, take that, get that. They certainly could have had the White House if they had seen it.
In the days after September 11th, Danielle struggled hard to deal with what had happened, turning to family and then close friends for support.
I called a girlfriend of mine that evening, and I got her answering machine. And I said, you're not going to believe what I've been involved with today. And I said, you know, American 77, I saw him. I saw it all. Call me. And Tuesday evening lapsed and Wednesday lapsed, and I hadn't heard from her, which was very odd. And then Thursday she called, and she sounded different on the phone. She said, did I understand your message right? And I said, yes, it was amazing. And I started just blurting out everything. And she said, Danielle, she said, Bob was at work that day. My husband was at work that day in the Pentagon, and he's missing. Last week I went to his funeral. It's real personal. This one?
Danielle is now taking some time off to spend with her family. She has yet to tell her two children, Kennedy and Garrett, what their mother actually experienced that day.
Kennedy, do you like this one?
And so how are you doing?
I think like the rest of the nation, I have good days and bad days.
Are there bad dreams or nightmares?
Sure, absolutely. I've sat up straight in bed many nights, reliving it, re-seeing it, rehearing it. The one that comes to mind most, dreaming of the green pool in front of me. That was part of the radar scope. It was a pool of gel, and I reached into the radar scope to stop that flight. But in the dream, I didn't harm the plane. I just held it in my hand. And somehow that stopped everything.
Oh, Brian, would that she could have.
Indeed.
You know, the plane that the brave passengers took down in Pennsylvania, do we know now where that plane was heading?
The theory is that plane was bound for the U.S. Capitol, and that this flight, American 77, was supposed to hit the White House, the terrorist 1-2 punch in Washington.
Just as they had done in New York.
Exactly.
You've been on top of the anthrax story, Brian.
Yes.
What's the latest?
The latest is that today the Postmaster General said he can no longer guarantee the safety of the U.S. mail. Just a handful of powder has paralyzed the mail system, stretched law enforcement way too thin, and terrorized the country.
But we're still looking for clues.
Urgently looking for clues all over the country right now.
We'll be talking about that. Thank you, Brian. And we'll be right back.
When 2020 returns.
Would you be surprised if there's an arrest in the anthrax cases based on photo evidence?
Next.
How do you catch someone who is sending death through the mail? Well, video surveillance cameras have been the undoing of many criminals. And now, as Tom Gerald reports, authorities are hoping that the newest video technology will help crack the case of just who is responsible for the spread of anthrax.
The trail in the search for the anthrax terrorist is going straight through the lens of surveillance cameras. U.S. postal facilities use small cameras extensively, and videotape from 46 post offices were gathered immediately after the initial anthrax attack. The letters themselves contain numerous clues, but the key search from the beginning has been for photographs of those responsible for mailing anthrax.
I have no doubt, and I can guarantee you, that the people who bought those stamps were caught on video.
2020 has learned that at least one law enforcement agency in the anthrax investigation is now examining faces on a few specific tapes, boiled down from the tens of thousands of videotapes rounded up in the past few weeks.
This same technology was at the forefront of the investigation into the World Trade Center attacks. Surveillance cameras captured terrorist Mohammed Atta and his co-conspirator, Abdul Aziz Alamori, at this cash machine in Portland, Maine. For the next 9 hours, both men are pictured on surveillance cameras, time and time again, at a Walmart, a gas station, and finally, airport security. Grant Fredericks is a forensic video specialist.
And many times investigators will look at a videotape and conclude there's no evidence there, and if they had the right tools, they clearly will be able to gather what they need.
When viewable, cops say images from surveillance cameras provide critical evidence and new leads to head off future attacks.
It might tell us something about the people that they were with.
Every day we're in public, experts say we pass at least 12 surveillance cameras. Problem is, many have poor picture quality. Without video enhancement, many are worthless. Fredericks is a master of turning bad surveillance video into hard-hitting evidence. His secret weapon? The Avid Detective, a portable computer video editing system that has cops like these lining up to learn how to use it. But how good is Detective? Take a look at this home video of a shooting in a panicked crowd at a Denver sports complex. From the video, can you tell who the gunman is?
What's the difference in the home video versus the video the jury saw?
Well, the original videotape was very shaky, it was very unstable. The very first thing you want to do is stabilize that video, so now we can clearly see who we're looking at.
But more than just giving cops a stable picture, the detective gives them valuable clues. In this case, it was able to pinpoint the identity of the real shooter. They could see what kind of jewelry he wore, and amazingly, they could even match the tread on one of his running shoes.
As he walks away from the camera, lifts his shoe up, we can see some more features in the bottom of the shoe.
With the help of a positive ID, the accused gunman was convicted. And that's why Fredericks has come here, the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. His goal? To train investigators from large and small departments across the country how to master this new crime-busting technology.
We were clearing cases that we never thought were clearable in the past.
That's because, Frederick says, cameras are clearly catching criminals in all sorts of illegal acts. Breaking into restaurants, holding up convenience stores, even trying to steal the little cameras watching them.
The kind of work that we do is very much like fingerprint analysis.
Like prints at a crime scene. In this case, video which shows cops where to dust for valuable fingerprints, beneath the robber's left hand on the teller's counter.
Your techniques can actually find things in a picture that aren't there
to
the naked eye.
That aren't there to the naked eye, but they're certainly there.
For example, there's even new see-in-the-dark technology. This car was at a crime scene. The license plate was important, but you couldn't see it. But with a little video magic, here it is. Which brings us back to using this technology in today's crime crisis, terrorism. A big part of the September 11th conspiracy was hatched in South Florida. The trail of some of the suicide bombers passed through this region's flight schools, bars, and apartments. And yes, those cash machines with their cameras. Police are now looking for possible accomplices.
I'm just a cop.
Miami-Dade detective Eric Cumgione spends hours a day looking for video clues.
We analyze every single frame to see if there's information that we need.
And as terrorism has entered the perplexing new world of germ warfare, similar clues may be tucked away in cameras somewhere.
Would you be surprised if there's an arrest in the anthrax cases based on photo evidence?
No, wouldn't be surprised at all. I would suspect that there will be video evidence in this investigation.
We'll be right back.
When 2020 returns,
nobody can ever say this environment is 100% free of spores.
next. '20 continues. Once again, Barbara Walters.
Health Secretary Tommy Thompson says that the Centers for Disease Control will move into any post office that may have handled tainted mail, but detecting anthrax spores and cleaning them up may not be the end of the story. Lynn Shure has a warning from a town that discovered the staying power of anthrax.
They are the most unlikely characters in this entire eerie drama. Icons of American life, a post office in New Jersey, a high-rise in Midtown Manhattan, ordinary places where we run our lives and our country. Who would have thought a building could become the enemy? That's exactly what happened here in Manchester, New Hampshire, nearly 50 years ago. This parking lot where I'm standing was once a 4-story brick building, a thriving textile mill that employed hundreds of people. But in 1957, it became the site of America's first epidemic of inhalation anthrax. And the decision to destroy that factory is a chilling warning of what could happen to today's anthrax sites. For nearly 20 years, workers at the Arms Textile Company turned the wool from goat skins into coat linings for wealthy American consumers. There were occasional cases of skin or cutaneous anthrax from contaminated animal hides.
Anthrax was also known as wool sorter's disease, and it was considered to be an occupational hazard, just taken in stride.
But as Manchester's current public health director, Fred Russick, told me, alarm bells went off when at least 3 workers fell ill with coughs and soaring fevers in the summer of 1957. They had the more lethal inhalation anthrax. All died. Arms Textile did not clean up, instead giving workers a vaccine tested by this man, Dr. Philip Brockman. But 9 years later, one more death. A man from the next-door machinery plant. How could that happen?
The only source of Bacillus anthracis spores that we could identify would be the textile company across this alleyway.
That's when the state took action.
The recommendation was that the mill should close.
But closing that old building with plenty of cracks and crevices for spores to hide was not enough.
So the decision was made to decontaminate and tear the building down, and the combustibles, such as the timbers and stuff, were burned on site.
What, you're telling me that this was basically a double scrubbing situation? Then they were going to tear it down and burn all the combustibles.
Right.
They even decided to bury the bricks that once formed the mill's walls.
Well, they were hauled down from where the mill site is, about a mile up the river here, in enclosed trucks, and that was meant to be so that it wouldn't be spread. And they were dumped someplace where we are now. I don't know exactly where, and nobody else seems to know exactly where.
John Mongan was the mayor of Manchester during part of the time the plant was being decontaminated. What exactly are you concerned about with those bricks?
Well, it's not only the bricks that are here, it's the bricks that aren't here. That so many of the bricks were stolen. And if they were stolen, then there's patios all over Manchester with spores in them. Could be.
The bricks were pronounced clean, and in fact, there's been no reported anthrax in Manchester since 1966. But the question remains, can anthrax spores and the threat they pose ever be totally eliminated from a building?
When we do the cleanup, whatever disinfectant we use, it will completely eradicate the spores.
Fred Stroud is in charge of the cleanup for the first American anthrax outbreak since Manchester. His job is to make the American Media Building in Boca Raton, Florida, safe.
The contamination may be on flat surfaces, it may be on furniture, it may be on rugs, and we'll have follow-up testing to ensure that they are completely eradicated.
Stroud will spray the same substance that was used at our ABC News headquarters in New York.
It's basically peroxide on one side, which is the catalyst, and it's surfactant-based, almost like, and I don't want to be this simple, but it's almost like a dishwashing solution. When the two mix, they penetrate the outer covering of the anthrax spore, and they kill the spore.
No spores have been found at ABC, and some of the areas are back in use. But even though sleek modern buildings are easier to clean than the old mills of Manchester, the head of AMI says he'll wait until after the cleanup to decide whether his editors and photographers feel safe enough to return. No such doubt for this man on the front lines.
I feel very comfortable, rehabilitating these facilities. If it was my home and I had anthrax in my home and I treated it with this substance, I would be very happy to go back into it.
We'll be right back.
When 2020 continues.
I signed the confession. I was totally wiped out after that tremendous amount of guilt that I betrayed my country.
This is not the first time this country has been united against terrorism. None of us who lived through it can forget the plight of the Americans taken hostage in Iran more than 20 years ago. For more than a year, their fate was uncertain as President Carter tried to win their freedom. And when they were finally released, the hostages were America's heroes. But today, they are feeling betrayed by their own government. They're battling not with Iran, but with Washington. Have they become the victims of terrorism for a second time?
We were stripped naked, told to face the wall, put our hands up, and the guards behind us, someone was giving the command, ready, aim, fire.
Iran, 1979. The American-backed Shah was overthrown by fiercely anti-American supporters of the Islamic fundamentalist leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini. Iranian militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. For the next 444 days, 52 Americans were held hostage. They were subjected to relentless abuse and humiliation, kept in solitary confinement, even tortured. Charles Jones was a communications officer at the embassy.
To hear them actually click the bolts back, and what you're doing, you're expecting the bullets to slam into your body. And they did that a couple of times.
This was done to terrify you.
To terrorize us.
After months of negotiations, their release triggered an outpouring of national unity and patriotism. But to free them, the U.S. government had to make a deal that forbid the hostages from seeking retribution. Now, these three men, along with the other former hostages, are defying that agreement and suing Iran for $8 billion. It's a controversial case, pitting them not only against Iran, but the U.S. government. But before you can understand the controversy, you have to understand what happened to them. Retired Lieutenant Colonel David Rader was a military attaché.
Probably the lowest point of my entire period was when I refused to sign a document contrary to the best interests of my country.
A confession, so-called
confession that I was a spy. They told me that if I would not cooperate, they were going to kidnap my handicapped and legally blind son. They knew his bus route. They knew the school he was going to. They knew how he got there. They knew what time he was picked up and what time he was dropped off. And they told me that if I did not cooperate, they would kidnap Jim, and they would periodically send fingers and toes to my wife. That's a low point. Any country that would use a handicapped child as leverage against anybody, not just me, but anybody, will forever have my complete distaste and hatred.
You did not sign the confession.
I did not.
Barry Rosen was the embassy press attaché.
The day that we were taken from the embassy, they brought me downstairs from this house. A person stood there and I was forced to sit in front of him and to answer questions and to sign a list of confession. They stuck an AK-47 to my head and counted from 10 to 1. By the time I hit 4, I said, I love my country. I want to be a good American, but I have a wife and 2 small children. My country has to understand what I'm going through. I signed the confession. I was totally wiped out after that. Tremendous amount of guilt that I betrayed my country. It stayed with me for that 444 days.
Where were you held captive? You were next to a torture chamber, I understand.
Yes. I think it was September 1980. I woke up to this blood-curdling scream. They were torturing men, women, and children. They would take a hose and put it down their victim's throat and turn the water on, basically drowning them. And you would hear this horrible gurgling sound. And the thing that struck me, and I think it struck us all, was, are we next?
Is this something that you never get over?
Anybody who maintains that you get over this or there's closure is just kidding themselves. There's never closure.
Attorney Tom Langford represents the former hostages. Mr. Langford, to date, have any of the American hostages received any kind of substantial compensation?
No, not a penny for any of the pain and suffering they endured.
In 1981, the U.S. government signed the Algiers Accord. That document exchanged the hostages' freedom for $8 billion of Iran's frozen assets and also prohibited any hostage from filing claims against Iran.
Here was the choice put to President Carter and the U.S. government. Either sign these accords or we're going to take these hostages and try them, which was a euphemism for execute them. There is no choice. There was no choice.
Mr. Langford, let me be the government for a minute. They made a deal. Isn't a deal a deal?
A deal is not a deal when it's performed under duress.
If I hold a gun to your head and I said, give me your earrings or I'm going to blow your brains out, I'm sorry. That's not an agreement.
Finally, in 1996, the hostages believed they'd found a way around the deal. Congress passed the Anti-Terrorism Act, which enables victims of terrorism to sue terrorists and their sponsors. The hostages insist that the new law supersedes the 1981 agreement. So last year, they filed their own case. The suit goes to court. The former hostages testify. The judge says, I'll decide on damages. It looked as if you'd won your case.
Yes.
And then, just recently, the U.S. government comes in and says, forget it, it's invalid.
Yes.
Last week, the U.S. government, essentially representing Iran, which has ignored the lawsuit, said that while they sympathized with the former hostages, any new law does not apply to them. In short, they cannot sue Iran.
I was dumbfounded and astounded and ashamed of our government that it could turn its back on us at this time. It's unconscionable. And even Judge Sullivan said that to the State Department and Department of Justice people. He harangued them. He said, who are you here for? You are for the defense. You are defending Iran.
Why do you think the U.S. government is doing this?
Well, the State Department has said we will make no concession. We will strike no deals with state sponsors of terrorism. But you wonder what happened between August 16th, when we got our judgment on the merits, and the hearing on damages on October 15th, when the government appeared.
What happened was September 11th.
That's right.
Do you think that made a difference?
You have to believe it did.
The feeling being, why irritate the Iranian government?
I think that's exactly right. I think we're trying to build a consolidated group and attack Afghanistan, and I think Iran has a role to play there. At least the State Department believes it does.
The Justice and State Departments decline to be interviewed, but deny that politics played any role. They say they're trying to protect the nation's foreign policy and that they didn't even know about the hostages case until after September 11th. But the former hostages believe that the government's trying to curry diplomatic favor with Iran, even though Iran remains on the State Department's list of nations that sponsor terrorism. Iran condemned the September 11th attack. They have nothing but animosity themselves for the Taliban. A war makes strange bedfellows. So the U.S. right now needs Iran. On a practical level, doesn't that make sense to you?
It doesn't make sense because it's exactly what we've done all the time. Short-term gain, long-term loss. Iran is always angry at us. The State Department is fooling itself to think that in some way, shape, or form, we can have an agreement and some sort of relationship with Iran because of September 11th. It will never happen.
Barbara, there isn't anybody in this entire group that doesn't support President Bush's war on terrorism. We just believe that we're the first step, that you start at the beginning. We were the first hostage-taking in the modern era.
In December, the court will hear the government's arguments to throw out the case. So you have to fight this out in court?
Yes.
What if you lose?
I think it sends a terrible message to state sponsors of terrorism.
Would you take this case all the way up to the Supreme Court?
Yes. It's that important a principle.
We were the victims of international terrorism, and Iran must pay the price.
The matter will also now be taken up by a House and Senate conference committee. South Carolina Senator Fritz Hollings is championing the cause of the former hostages. We'll be right back.
When 2020 returns,
we need the domestic equivalent of the Customs Service.
But it's Customs that let the hijackers in.
Give Me a Break. Next.
We now know that there are serious problems with airport security, but the big question is, how do we fix it? Congress says that it has a plan, but John Stossel says, give me a break.
Because, Barbara, we all want to make flying safer. But I get nervous when every single senator says, we know the solution. Let government run things.
They quickly held a vote.
The ayes are 100, the nays are 0.
Every single one of them agreed. From now on, government should run airport security.
If it doesn't have federalism, it doesn't work.
You can't professionalize if you don't federalize.
And now these congressmen are sponsoring a similar bill in the House. They say it should be law already.
This is a matter of life and death.
Most people we interviewed agreed.
When the federal government gets involved, it's a good deal.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
I would feel safer, yes, I would.
And it just sounds right. Got a problem? Professionalize it. Bring in the government. But wait a second. If you want efficiency and professionalism, is creating another big government bureaucracy really the way to go?
The biggest professional federal agency outside the military is the post office. And even with taxpayer subsidies, it can't compete efficiently with private companies like United Parcel Service and Federal Express.
Any 9, everything inside the bag.
Now politicians are outraged that airlines hired screeners who turned out to be ex-cons. But a government study found 150 of the IRS's seasonal workers had criminal records. And how much do we know about the gun-carrying National Guardsmen now patrolling airports? Arizona discovered one was a felon who'd been selling phony weapons permits. He passed the background check.
And we did those background checks through law enforcement agencies.
He was caught only because someone watching the soldiers on TV recognized him.
There are no scandals in government agencies?
Well, I mean, I think you start out with a fresh outlook here, giving the system a chance to work.
Well, the current system's far from perfect. There's no evidence that on September 11th, airport screeners did anything wrong. Knives, the size the hijackers apparently used, were legal under government rules. It was government that failed. Immigration let the hijackers in. 3 had expired visas. 6 had no records. Yet now we're going to give the government more power?
Government workers are more professional than private workers?
In this case, yes, because we need the domestic equivalent of the Customs Service.
But it's Customs that let the hijackers in.
Well, in many ways, a lot of them came in on visas, which was an INS problem.
The Senate's plan would create a new agency with 28,000 new government employees.
It's not like this is a new idea. It's been tried before in Europe.
This afternoon, an Air France 737 was taken over by gunmen.
20 years ago, airports there had government-run security systems. They didn't stop hijacking. After that, most big European airports started hiring private screeners. And since then, hijacking at those airports have dropped. The screeners are supervised by government. Government sets the safety standards. But the advantage of private screeners is that there's competition. You can fire a bad company. You can't fire the government.
Amsterdam, Belfast, Brussels, Copenhagen, Frankfurt, Hamburg, London, Paris, Rome, all private companies competing. They tried a government operation. It was cumbersome bureaucracy.
I can't believe that they did the same kind of training that we're going to do here, and with all due respect to them, that's their problem.
Let me correct you, though.
And Congressman Gansky said what I said about Europe was wrong.
Because in Europe, Italy, Ireland, Portugal,
he pulled out a press release from senators that said Italy and Spain use government screeners.
Supervision, but not for screening.
No, for screening.
But he and the senators were wrong. We called the airports. Rome and Madrid both say they use private screening companies. In any case, the politicians are certain a government takeover is the right thing.
100 United States senators can't be wrong.
Oh, please. Only in Washington would they say, you're not a professional unless you work for them. Give me a break.
But, John, the private screeners who let people come on the plane that day on September 11th, they work for private companies and competing companies, and they, you know, they weren't able to do the job.
But they were obeying the government's rules, and there is no proof that government screeners would have stopped the hijacking. The key is to have those companies competing, but to have tough standards enforced by an FAA that punishes companies that don't spend the money or slack off. You can fire a company, as we said, but you can't fire the government.
And that's your point.
That's my point.
Keep the government out. Well, if you want to join the debate over airport security, log on to John's webpage at abcnews.com. It's an important debate. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And that's our program for tonight. We thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Walters. I'll see you tomorrow on The View. And for all of us here at 2020, good night.
What's life like under the veil, inside a closed world of luxury and secrets? She knows. She married Osama bin Laden's powerful brother.
What do you see in people's faces when you tell them your name?
She's the first bin Laden family member to speak. What she know about bin Laden and his brothers? Watch Primetime Thursday.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.